Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President, and thank you for swapping my chair's spot tonight so I could listen to our budget reply. I too rise as a proud West Australian, and before I get on to the issue that I really want to talk about, affordable housing, I think that I need to have some rebuttal to what we've just heard from Senator Back. And certainly tonight the budget in Western Australia has been delivered by Colin Barnett, and WA's budget mess is a result of Colin Barnett's failure to plan for the future. Mr Barnett enjoyed record revenue and has turned it into record deficit and record debt. A competent Premier would have kept debt low in order to cope with future declines in revenue. Colin Barnett's descent into WA's worst ever financial management is complete, with the state budget confirming a $2.7 billion deficit in 2015-16 on the back of a $1.3 billion deficit in 2014-15. Mr Barnett has taken the $3.6 billion state debt he inherited from WA Labor in 2008 and turned it into a $31 billion debt in 2015 and 16, and that debt is expected to blow out to a massive $36 billion in 2017-18. And no matter how the Abbott Government West Australian senators might want to dress that up, Colin Barnett and Mike Nahan and the rest of the Barnett government must take responsibility for that. And Western Australians have found out this afternoon that all of their state charges have again made a massive leap. And so if you're poor or you're on an unemployment benefit or you're on some other benefit in Western Australia, boy, you're going to cop it tough, because Barnett has just made life much, much harder for Western Australians and seems quite unwilling or unable in his arrogant attitude to take responsibility for where he finds himself now. There are other stories out there than the one that you will hear told in here by some of the West Australian senators. I want to talk about something else. Last week, and this comes off the back of the affordable housing report being released in the Senate, and I certainly thank all of the senators who worked really hard on that very complex task, and obviously to the Secretariat who've done a fine job on what is really a very comprehensive report with some 40 recommendations in it. But last Friday, Mark McGowan, the West Australian Labor opposition leader, along with Gary Gray, the member for Brand, and myself, met with three gentlemen in Rockingham, Jonathan, Owen and Derek. Along with others, both Jonathan and Owen presented at the Perth Affordable Housing Inquiry. We learnt at that inquiry that Owen takes in people into his own home in the Rockingham area, people who are homeless, and he provides them with a bed, or they're able to camp in his backyard, and he gives them food and a warm place to stay. And he does that every night of the week, and he's to be applauded for that. Jonathan, who at the time of the inquiry was sleeping rough in his car on the beach at Rockingham and was using the cold showers and the ablution blocks at the Rockingham beachfront to clean himself up. And along with his son, Jonathan was sleeping rough for 18 months in his car, and his son was suffering severe mental illness in a very difficult situation, and Jonathan's own health has suffered quite dramatically from living rough for such a long period of time. There was good news for Jonathan, because he's now got a Department of Housing home, and that is such good news to see that he was able to do that. But that only happened because not because there are services in the Rockingham area, there are not, unfortunately, but because the Salvation Army took his son in because his son was suffering so badly, and through Labor's Street to Home program, Jonathan was finally able to get housing after a very long time of living rough in his car. Jonathan and Owen, as I said at the outset, were joined by Derek. And Derek has experienced homelessness in the Rockingham area for a number of years. Derek has some mental and physical health issues. On the day that we met him, his leg was broken, and he required further treatment for that. And Derek has been living rough for a couple of years. He's been living on his boat, not the whole time, but for periods of time, and that's moored in the local boat club. And despite the council agreeing he could continue to live in his boat, the boat club has asked him to leave. So last Friday night, along with Mark McGowan and Gary Gray, when I met Derek, he had nowhere to go, absolutely nowhere to go. Nowhere to spend Friday night. I was going back to my nice warm home in Perth, and Derek was going to I don't know where. The Salvation Army have offices quite near where we were meeting in Rockingham, just across the road. And I asked Derek, what could the Salvos offer him? And the answer was nothing. And I'm certainly not criticising the Salvos, far from it. They do a great job in our community. But in the community of Rockingham, there is nowhere for homeless people to go, absolutely nowhere. And the Salvos do a great job putting people in touch with other services, as they did with Jonathan's son with the Street to Home program, and Jonathan himself. They offer meals and comfort, but they don't have accommodation. And the other thing that's happened in the Rockingham area is the rangers, who were quite tolerant of the people sleeping rough on the beaches, have suddenly become intolerant. And so we've had incidences where rangers have taken blankets and other belongings of the homeless people in the Rockingham area. One of the things that Owen does when you go into his home, he's got a big pile of blankets against the wall, and he really is quite an amazing human being who's on a low income himself, but because he's been homeless in the past, he does see it as his way of giving back. But back to Derek. I can tell you, Mr Acting Deputy President, it was very, very difficult to sit there and not be able to offer Derek any alternatives other than to turn him out as I went home to my house. Derek sits at the bottom of Australia's real housing affordability problem. Whether you rent or whether you want to buy your own home, we have a real problem with housing affordability in this country. And a few weeks ago, before Friday, I witnessed the West Australian Police and the City of Perth evict the Noongar Tent Embassy from Madagarup, Harrison Island, where a group of homeless people had set up an embassy to protest their plight. During that eviction, and I witnessed it, the police issued 5 move-on orders to largely Aboriginal people, 2 very elderly people, copped move-on orders. And I tried to negotiate with the police to let the old people out of the van, but they were having none of it. And they issued those move-on orders in a 45-minute period, which seems to me to go completely against the intent of the legislation, because someone who gets a move-on order has to be suspected of something, to do something violent, well, that wasn't on witness, to breach the peace, they certainly weren't doing that, hindering a law-abiding person, they weren't doing that, and they certainly hadn't committed any crime. Yet the 4 of them were bundled in a police wagon in front of my eyes, 2 of them old people, and issued move-on orders, and no doubt were taken down to the police station to be processed the next day, just because they were homeless and camping on Harrison Island. And of course, it's an offence if you don't comply with a move-on order, and the maximum penalty is $12,000. Now, someone who's homeless, where do they get $12,000 from? And they could be in prison for 12 months. So I suspect some of them, if they've been issued with other move-on orders in the past, will end up in prison for 12 months. So I do commend the inquiry to senators in this place, the 40 recommendations, and I do say that we do need a bipartisan approach on homelessness and affordable housing. We need long-term structural change so that people like Derek can live in dignity and not have nowhere to go at the end of a day. So homelessness is something we need to act on, and we need to act on it right now, today, in a bipartisan way. Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President.
Thank you, Senator Lyons. Senator Rice.
Thank you, Mr Acting